Welcome to Clarinet Ninja. As I record this, it is New Year's Eve 2021. I don't know about you, but it's been one heck of a roller coaster this year. To sort of address my complicated feelings about what's happened in 2021, I want to talk about clarinet articulation. Join me if you will. Here's some things. I'm just gonna break this down as fast and as clearly as I can in my own head. Clarinet articulation, well, any articulation, but we're talking about clarinet, has to do with how the notes begin and end. We've got the middle of the note, that's our tone. How we start and end that tone is articulation. Let's break it down one further step. How do we make tone? Our reed vibrates. That requires air. The way we can stop a reed from vibrating, if there's air, there's vibration. So we either need to stop that vibration with our tongue by putting our tongue on the reed. That stops, and if we leave our tongue on the reed, it stops it for a long time. If we pull our tongue off the reed, vibration starts again. Or we can stop blowing. That's a way to articulate. We can stop blowing. Start blowing, stop blowing, articulation. Articulation is generally synonymous with the word tonguing, but that's a little bit of a misnomer because air has a lot to do with our ability to articulate, as much as our tongue, maybe more. That's what we're going to get to in a second. And what does that mean? Or we can actually just release the pressure from the reed so that it's not available to vibrate. Those are three ways we can stop the reed from vibrating. All would count as articulation. But how do we consider effective clarinet articulation? What are the goals? For me, and I think for you, the goals are, or should be, having it be clean, having it be light and or fast, and having it be flexible. And we're going to go over some things that people say about articulation. They've been said perhaps millions upon millions of times. And they're true. This is not like I'm going to debunk the myths of what everybody says. No, I'm going to explain to you why it's true and why it's important, because sometimes the explanation of these things is not fully explained. And I'm going to try and do it quickly, cleanly. Here we go. Boom. The number one thing that people say about articulation is tip of the tongue to the tip of the reed. Cool. Why? The reason why is because that is probably the most consistent from person to person, the way that you're going to get clean, light, fast, flexible articulation. That is the most likely scenario. The thing that they don't talk about, and is going to be the umbrella idea of this video, is this should all happen with the voicing that you play a legato with no articulation. If you were to play a slurred scale, you want the articulation, the voicing, where your tongue position is, to be very related to when you are going to articulate with your tongue. Articulating with your tongue, people say it's like saying the letter D or T or da or ta, tu, but it's usually a D or a T with some sort of vowel sound. A lot of times, and I basically agree with this. I mean, I don't know. This isn't necessarily how I think of it, but T has a high tongue position. Ta has a low tongue position. So I'm actually just thinking of the vowel. I mean, obviously the consonant, whether it's D, T, ta, da, whatever. We're ignoring the first consonant, but ah has a low tongue position. Oo has a different tongue position. I don't know how to describe that one. E has a high tongue position. And people will say you should think of these vowels. And that's a very effective entry point into talking about this. People will talk about using a T syllable or a D syllable. Cool. These are all really great ideas. A T is going to be a little bit more percussive. A D is going to be a little bit more gentle. We should be confident in our ability to use any of these syllables, because that's not really a big difference. What we really need to do, and when I say we, I mean me and you, is develop a way that we play and are able to articulate with our tongue, so that our air is doing exactly the same thing when we play a long note as when we use our tongue to articulate. And I'm going to try and hold myself to saying when we use our tongue to articulate, because you can use your air to articulate. And sometimes we use our air and our tongue together to articulate. So there are slight differences in how it's actually working, and I want to try and honor those differences with how I'm speaking about it. And I don't always do it, so sometimes I might mess up. In any case, let me mention now, the like button is activated. The subscribe button is activated. If you want to hit those at any point, if any value is gotten from this video, feel free to hit it. Smash it even. It would feel nice for me. But here's what I want to show you. When you play your mouthpiece, if you are playing the clarinet in a traditional Western classical way, if you've seen any of my videos before, one of my big things is this should make a C. Maybe a little sharp, maybe a little flat. Doesn't matter, but it should basically be a C in that general area and not too far from it. And then when you articulate, it should stay a C. It shouldn't move even for a second, right? Our pitch needs to stay exactly the same. And what this exercise is going to do is it's going to align your articulation voicing with your legato voicing. It's really important. Check it out. I'm going to play a whole note and then 4 quarter notes. What I want you to listen for is the consistency of the pitch and that my air is just blowing. I am not articulating with my air in this exercise at all. It is exclusively with my tongue. Check it out. You know, when I'm hearing myself do that right now, it seems like my articulation is pretty heavy. So maybe we can consider that was a T syllable. I mean, we can start messing around with that at any point because it doesn't really matter. That's the flexibility component of all this. But what you're hearing here is a consistency within the air and a consistency with our voicing, or my voicing, and that we are just using the very front part, the very end of our tongue, the part of our tongue that we would use to say T, D, la, ta, basically any vowel, and then the vowel part of our tongue, the A, E, I, O, U part of our tongue, is kind of in the same place, and that's what we want. We want it to stay the same, so that when we're playing our clarinet, there's not any sort of like there won't be a huge pitch difference, but there will be a very serious lack of clarity, because it's going to create a little bit of a very quick thing. By thing I mean like a little tweet 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 tweet. You might hear that when you play just the mouthpiece. It's very obvious when you play the mouthpiece. That will be covered up when you put the resonator, known as the clarinet, on top of it or under it. So this is a really good way to hold ourselves really accountable for that. I want to show you another exercise that illustrates another thing that people say about the clarinet and articulation, which is this is not about our tongue going towards the reed. It's about our tongue coming away. You know what? That's super true. If you think about this, you put your tongue on the reed and you blow, it's not going to make any noise. When you put your tongue on it, it's stopping the reed. You pull it away, the reed starts again. And that is something that just intuitively you have to think about it and say, yes, that's true. Otherwise, it doesn't seem true because we all think about the motion going forward and not the motion pulling away. And when I say motion pulling away, I'm making this giant motion, but it's not. It's like that. It's a small motion. We're just moving our tongue a little bit because the less motion means the faster your articulation can be. Light, in terms of how hard we're hitting the reed, we're going to get to this in a second, plus the smaller range of motion is going to allow us to articulate faster. So we got to keep that in mind. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my tongue on the reed. I was taught this when I was 19 years old, maybe 18. I was young and strong. Now I'm old and strong. Well, the way I was taught this is you stick your tongue out and you stick your tip of your tongue on the tip of the reed. While I'm at it, let me show you a picture of the tip of the reed, what I consider the tip of the reed. There it is. It's above this black line. Back to me. So we're going to take our tongue. We're going to put the tip of our tongue, which we can feel, because we can feel our tongue. You're going to take the very tip of your tongue, right there. You're going to put it on the tip of the reed, and then put this in your mouth. That's what I was taught. But that goes against everything I just said, which in the ensuing 30 years 30 years? Yeah. In the ensuing 30 years, I have found, for me, it's more important to consider articulation from where I am already playing the clarinet and not sticking my tongue out and putting on, because then maybe that's not where then when I put this in my mouth, is that where my tongue was when I playing long notes, or am I actually just establishing a different voicing and a different tongue position for the articulation that I am for playing legato? So my suggestion is this. Put this in your mouth like you normally would. Put your tongue on the reed. Don't let it vibrate, but blow. It'll sound like that, right? And so here's what I want you to get from this. You're going to pull your tongue away. That much. And then you're going to hear an explosion of sound. I'm going to move this away so I don't hurt your ears. So you hear, bam, there's sound. That's the tongue pulling away, not going towards, right? Because your tongue's already there. And if you can just sort of meditate a little bit as you do it, and how little you can pull your tongue away, that's how little you should pull your tongue away when you're playing, articulated notes with your tongue. So these things align, and this is a really solid place to start a bunch of other exercises from. What other exercises? Let me show you. There's a couple exercises I want you to get familiar with. And these exercises all have a very specific point, which is either to make your articulation clean or to make it light and fast and or flexible. We tend to think of articulation as playing a bunch of fast notes, like the articulation excerpts are Mental to the Midsummer Night's Dream. Cool. Playing them fast is important. It really is important. But having an ability to play articulation cleanly is also important. For me, one of the spots that always shows us something about articulation is, why does every vapor start on the B flat? Not every one of them, but a lot of them, right? So you're standing there, or sitting in this case. And you got to play that B flat. Then you hang out and you hang out and you hang out, and then you got to play this B flat. And we should have an articulation on it. It should have a nice, clean beginning to it. That's a really important articulation. And it's hard. And it requires air. And it requires a light tongue, but it's just pulling away. We need to be set and pull our tongue away, which is why this exercise of pulling away that I just did is so important, just conceptually speaking, right? So we want to be able to do that. Have a nice front end on a very quiet note. It's just as hard as getting a fast articulation. And I got to tell you, it's actually much more something that you're going to use. It's not quite as exciting or as flamboyant, but it is actually much more useful. In any case, let me show you how you can practice. There's 2 exercises to get your tongue clean and light. So let me give you the first one. These don't come in an order. This is the first one I'm going to give you. All right. So this exercise, I may have made this up. Maybe not. Maybe someone told me to do this. I can't remember. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play a G. No, I'm going to play a C. I'm going to play it. Give me a nice regular note. And then I'm going to ever so lightly put my tongue on the reed. I'm going to put the tip of my tongue on the tip of the reed, but not very hard. And in fact, so lightly that I'm able to continue playing that C. There's going to be a slight change in tone color and tone quality. Check it out. So here's my C. Good. And then I'm going to play that note. I'm going to count myself off. I'll play whole notes. I'll play a whole note regular, and then a whole note with my tongue on the reed, and then a whole note regular, and then a whole note with the tongue on the reed. Check it out. 2, 3. All right, so what that would produce in real life is something essentially unusable. Like, you couldn't do that There's really absolutely no practical use for that. But here is why I think it's important, because that is going to do two things. You have to have your air right, your voicing right, in order for that to come out. The amount of energy being put into the clarinet is the appropriate amount of energy. And it is also establishing the limits of how lightly you can put your tongue on the reed, because it has to be light. Otherwise, you're never going to get the sound out, right? So you're actually, me, you, whoever's doing this, is going over the line of the lightest you can put your tongue on the reed. It's actually too light. So you're establishing a boundary of like, how much pressure does it take on this reed? And so you can just play whole notes like that. That's actually just fine like that. The other thing that I have found to be super interesting, and this is more of an advanced technique, I'm going to play a C major scale from that C up to high C, back down, to see what happens, all with my tongue on the reed. And I'm going to leave my tongue on the reed the same amount, as lightly as I can, the whole time. So my tongue was on the reed the entire time. And now I'm going to do something that I've never shown anybody. And here it is. I'm going to play up to a high F with my tongue on the reed. Let's see if it works. Did you notice the high notes didn't come out? One of the things I like to show myself and figure out, and this is like for me, advanced practice, the altissimo notes. I mean, the articulation has to be incredibly light to get the sound to generate. If it's disturbed or interrupted at all, you don't get anything, and it really does show the tolerances from register to register. Like the low notes will come out cool, but if you disrupt the reed when it's playing a high note, it has a much bigger impact on the production of tone. And it's good to get that sense. So even though, again, you're never going to play with your tongue on the reed in real life, it's a very interesting and informative way to practice the clarinet. And I wouldn't do it for more than like 3 or 4 minutes at a time. Not suggesting that. But it's an interesting sort of check-in and an interesting way to get a genuine tactile sense of the limitations of how lightly you can put your tongue on the reed. All right, and now in order to create a curative to potentially not putting your tongue on the reed hard enough, I'm going to do my version of an exercise that I believe originated with Daniel Bonnard, maker of this ligature. Kind of the leader of all things clarinet orchestrally in America. I didn't learn this from anybody who studied with somebody who studied with Bonnard. I'm not in the lineage of that, but as far as I know, this is a pretty accurate way of doing what he was talking about. But for those people that have studied with somebody that studied with Daniel Bonnard, if I'm getting this wrong, it's with a very, very loving heart. And I'm just actually trying to not say this is what Daniel Bonnard said, but this is how I use this. Whether it's what he said or not, can't promise you that. But this is how I do it. And the idea is to play a staccato note and then stop that note with your tongue, but keep your air going. And then move your finger while you are still blowing. That way we can really hear if we've stopped the reed entirely. Now we are figuring out that how the real boundary, like we just did an exercise where our tongue was too light. Now we are doing an exercise where we can hear that little extra fuzzy sound if it's there. We don't want it to be there, which means we need to figure out where exactly on the reed we should stop it. In theory, it should be right in the middle, on the tip of the reed. That would be the most efficient way to stop the reed. However you get the reed to stop, if you can do it quickly enough and it feels good to you and it's clean, it's light, it's everything it needs to be, I don't think it matters where you hit the reed, as long as it's working. I mean, we need to be focused on the results and only change our process if we're not getting the results we want. Anyway, blah, 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 blah. Let me show you how I do this. So I'm going to play a C major scale, and I'm just going to give this to you whether I'm successful at it or not. And just so you can hear success, you can hear failure, you can hear all of it. Right now, I'll do it all. So again, I'm going to play it like a C. I'm going to keep blowing. I'm going to keep blowing the entire time that I'm doing this, except for when you see me inhale. But I will be blowing the entire time. And you'll be able to hear large blank spots in between the notes where my fingers are moving, but there's no sound coming out. I'm going to back up to see if I can get my hands in this shot. All right, here we go. That was more successful than I imagined. There was a couple times when you heard the little resonant change of note. I'm going to actually try and I'm going to simulate failure, or maybe I'm just going to fail on purpose or on accident. I don't know. But I want you to hear what we're trying to avoid. So I play the note, and then I'm holding my tongue on the reed, and then I pull up a finger. And if I can hear that next note, which is pretty obvious when it comes out, that means my tongue is not stopping the reed entirely. And so then we need to find a different spot on the reed. Or perhaps use a little bit more pressure. But not much, right? Just a little bit. So we can find the right equation of pressure versus spot on the reed, which is why the whole tip-to-tip thing is important, right? Because that is the theoretical most efficient way to do it. That's why people say to do it. But it is, just to keep in mind, to address a certain thing. And if that thing doesn't need to be addressed, you don't need to do that, right? Maybe you're already doing it, and maybe it just doesn't feel like tip-to-tip to you. There's all sorts of things, because the challenge in all of this is you can't see what your teacher is doing, and they can't see what you're doing. So this is all just a bunch of words, which is why these exercises are so helpful, right? Is that you are able to get results that indicate what it is, what component of this needs to be different. So that is really the meat of what I think is going to be useful information for you to find a way into articulating that's comfortable and successful. And just keep in mind, again, I'm going to say it again, clean, light / fast, and flexible. That's what we want. We want to be able to make nice accents, which accent is going to come more from our air than our tongue. It's very unlikely in classical playing that you're going to use your tongue to make an accent. That comes from our air. If you're a jazz player, again, a lot more flexibility with the rules. And you make whatever sound you imagine in your ear, which is what we're doing with classical playing too, but we've got some more rules. In any case, so we want it to be flexible. We want to be able to make nice accents. We want to be able to cut notes off short if we're playing some Stravinsky, or if we're playing something that calls for that. So these are all the things that are going to help, because we need the reed to start vibrating like that when we're blowing, which takes the right air, the right voice, and the right everything. But it also needs to keep in mind, these are just short versions of very long notes, right? It's just the middle of that long. So it needs to start right away. It needs to end cleanly and have control over that. And that's pretty much it for clarinet articulation in terms of just getting going. I mean, I could go on for another hour and a half or more about any of these exercises, but I won't. Thanks for being here. Like, subscribe, do the whole thing, and come back next time. All right, bye.